What up, 24-hour party people? 'Tis I, Tim the Brand Weaver, and as always, you're listening to Branding for Breweries, the podcast that brings you the brightest minds in the brewing world to help your brewery thrive and survive from a marketing, branding, and sales perspective. And today is no different, and if anything, even more exciting than normal, because I am chatting to my homie, my bro, my broski, all the good friend names that you want to throw under the sun, Miss Harriet Kelly. She is, well, what do we say about Harry? She is a brewery marketing consultant. She's worked with some of the big hitters. We've got Northern Monk, we've got Brewgooder, recently with Salt and Ossett, having been heavily involved in the latest rebrand of the Ossett and Rat range. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. The idea of how you position a cask brewery, a cask range for a younger generation, for a new generation. Doesn't have to be younger, but it's a different one. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together in a way that, of course, we can sense you're clapping, but of course we can't hear you because this is a live stream and we can't hear you. But let's welcome Harry to the stage, everyone. Harry! Hey, bud.
Hi, Tim. Thank you very much for having me. That was a lovely intro. Big into it.
Yeah, well, got to hype up my homies. It's important, right? And we've spoken lots, so it's great that we finally get to do it live and online as well.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
You ready for this?
I'm ready. Let's
Ready.
go.
Born ready. Okay, so dude, before we get stuck into this big old pile of cask information, for those lovely folk who maybe aren't aware of you and your work, would you be so kind as to let people know who you are, what you do, and where you come from in a very Cilla Black-esque way?
Absolutely. So I'm Harry Kelly. I am a big beer nerd, originally from outskirty West London. Always loved beer. Grew up on a beautiful combination of Guinness and Stella. Not at the same time, but very much in my formative years, you drink what your dad drinks, sort of thing. And I was fortunate enough to move to lovely Leeds, one of the greatest beer cities of all time, many, many, many moons ago, and really got more and more into beer as my life went on. Really, I'm a big cask drinker. Was a big sort of crafty geek, I'd say, a good few years back. I tend to stick to the real ale side these days, but yeah, I cut my brand beer teeth working with the amazing Northern Monk. Again, quite a few moons ago now, but obviously an incredible powerhouse in the craft space and an amazing learning for me in terms of how to do brand right and really nail storytelling and living and breathing a key brand in all that you do. Since then, I've worked always in food and drink, mainly in beer, pretty much always in in-house roles as well, actually, for different breweries until quite recently this year, going full-time self-employed in the consultancy world, which is, well, as you'll know, is a big, big step that feels right. I think what I've been really enjoying about it is I think a lot of breweries, what they actually need, lots of brands, is someone to come in sometimes and sort of helicopter in and ask the right questions. I think when you've done a few in-housey roles for different sizes and types of beer brands, you get a feel for what those pain points are, what crops up, what silly things that actually aren't silly exist in this magical, weird world of beer that we live in.
It's beautiful. One of my favorite phrases is it's hard to read the label when you're stuck inside the jar. And that idea that someone can come in, such as yourself and myself, and go, okay, what's going on? Did you realize X, Y, and Z? It's like you try and be a breath of fresh air, don't you, for those kind of people, to show them the light in many ways, or be the Sherpa up the marketing and branding mountain.
I would love to be the Sherpa of that mountain. It's a complex world, isn't it? And it's fab. And I'm really delighted to have started off mainly with craft brands. And I think it's given me a really good feel for what works and how visual pieces and nuances of tone and whatnot fit together. But I've really enjoyed digging into Cask, partly because I'm a nerd and that's where my heart lies, and that'll tend to be the pint I go for, but also a really interesting point for cask beer, I'd say, in terms of its journey and the generational piece. I'm delighted to be on that topic with you today.
Well, I was going to say that's what we're going to unpack, right? And let's get stuck in, because I'm sure people just want to know all the juicy bits, because we're going to have loads of cask brewers out there going, I just want younger people to drink my beer and not the granddads. So let's start with that. From your side of things, what is the common perception between your older cask drinker and your kind of younger, I suppose, crafty market? What are we looking at? What's the state of play right now?
I think it's worth saying initially that within the industry, I think our perception of the perception is actually different to what it is. I think it's become a little bit of an echo chamber in beer folk telling other beer folk that younger people think X, Y, Z about cask beer, or that it's an old man's drink. You know, I'm not saying anything for the first time here, but it is important, I think, to remember that when going into these conversations. I think there's generally a slightly more affluent consumer with a lot of cask than we might typically expect. Generally, it is an older consumer, but there absolutely is interest, and we'll dig into it, I'm sure, but like a real good case for why cask is a really exciting potential space for young consumers to move into in terms of their drinking habits.
And I suppose that excitement and that opportunity dovetailed with what you did with Ossett and Rat, right? You guys could see the opportunity there and decided to embrace it. Am I right?
Yeah, so I started working with Ossett Brewery from like summer last year, sort of June, July. An amazing brewery, I have to say, big out to the guys there. Phenomenal powerhouse that's really well known around Yorkshire, especially producing brilliant quality beers. When I came in, the business is at an amazing sort of growth stage at the moment, where there's a cracking leadership team that has a real mixed bag of sort of craft and cask experience, especially. And the ambition was to modernise sort of Ossett's core range and build out a new range within that, which is the Rat range, taking all of that beautiful tradition and heritage story, that provenance story that Ossett is full of and really strong in, whilst adapting their products to be suitable and appealing, and sort of lead the way in being able to do a bit of both in terms of targeting younger consumers and consumers that are more familiar with the craft space and how that shows up on shelf or on bar.
And I can imagine there must be a bucket load of cask brewers out there going, yeah, we need to do something like this. You know, it's wonderful to see it being done on such a big stage. But can you unpack the things that you need to consider, or what did you go through? What were you thinking about as you repositioned Ossett and obviously recreated the Rat range, I suppose, because like you say, you expanded it out. So what are the things that you had to consider to get to the point where you're like, yep, we've ticked those boxes and done it?
I'd say, okay, let's start early with some actually quite practical tidbits, perhaps. So,
Perfect.
what do consumers want? Basically, I think the key challenge that's relevant across the board here is reducing a barrier to entry. That is often, in the case of cask, at that point of purchase. So demystifying what that magical liquid that's getting poured often out of sight, actually, what it is, and helping reduce any uncertainty or lack of willingness to try to risk your 4, 5, £6 on something you're not sure about. And so a way to do that we tapped into that's been brilliant, I think, is bringing in a little bit more education at that point of purchase. So things that seem quite simple, like adding in a descriptor word, so a super low-key tasting note onto each of your pump clips. Again, that reduces a little bit that barrier to entry and that understanding piece for someone on the side of the bar that might have had a bitter before, but they're not quite sure what it is, you know, adding in hoppy, adding in light, adding in refreshing. It can really help. And I think coupled with that, ensuring that what might actually be on the reverse of that pump, so visible to your bar staff that are serving it, giving them some helpful descriptors, tasting notes, whether it's Cyclops or however your brand embodies that. It might be a bit more creative or, you know, wordy in how you frame it, but essentially informing folk both sides of the bar on what your product is. And that seems like quite a simple thing, but to get there can feel quite difficult at times.
I couldn't agree more. Like the amount of clips that you see, and obviously there's a lot of effort that goes into the artwork, into the creative side of things, and the naming a lot of the times. And when you're battling with real estate, when you've got something the size of a clip, and granted you've seen some aggressively large ones, but for the most part they're, you know, a modest size, to go, oh, I've got to get more text on here, I've got to get like a little sneak peek or a taster teaser, as it were, in there. For what it takes up, it definitely can help out, because you're trying to find those words that people relate to and go, oh yeah, I like that flavor, or I like, you know, I want to feel like that. But actually putting it on the back, the little prompters for the people behind the bar, I think that's a golden tip there, mate. That's class. I love that. Okay, so we've broken down the barrier to entry. People are starting to go, okay, I'm going to give this a go. But then from a positioning side of things, you know, what you decided to do with the imagery, the styling, what inspired that? What were you looking at? And, you know, what was the journey? Take me on a journey, Harry, please.
So I'd say for Ossett's core range, Ossett's had a phenomenal core range for a really long time, actually. They're stellar beers, award-winning beers, real powerhouses in their own right. And I think we brought in quite a nice approach that I've guess sort of taken a bit from the craft side, and we ended up working with a fantastic illustrator called, might as well shout him out, Stalin, Stuart Allen, fantastic guy.
The almighty Stalin. You'll
The
see him all
almighty
over the place.
Stalin.
He's wicked. I love him.
I think there's real strength in working with a specific creative to really dig into what your brand's about and to ensure that there's uniformity and consistency and a clear story behind your core range of beers. So for Ossett, that involved tapping into sort of themes around folkloric tradition across Yorkshire, which are beautiful sort of areas of interest actually for younger generations at the minute. Now we're very much revisiting sort of more traditional looks, feels, interests and stories. So it was fab harnessing that, because it felt like a very natural progression from what it already had. I guess quite a fun maybe tidbit story piece on this would be, I was working for a brewery many years ago, and I remember doing a rebrand of the core range. I wasn't involved, but seeing it, and a comment had come up online that said something around, oh, they look like Power Rangers assembled, and it ruffled some feathers internally. But since then, I've never forgotten it, and I've always taken it as quite a brilliant piece of advice, actually, where in that they mean yellow, red, green, blue, because as simple as it sounds, when you actually get out of your living beer everyday bubble and you think about what the average consumer is actually thinking, whether they're at that bar moment or otherwise, people could have their favorite beer and they might actually not even know what it's called. If you said to them, oh, what's on the artwork for that? What's in the illustration? They might not have a clue, but they know it's the green one by such and such. And I guess it's linking back into barrier to entry there, but you can really find strength, I think, in uniformity and consistency whilst having variety within a range, if that makes sense.
100%. I love it. And I've heard it myself. Like, oh, what do you want? It's a pint of the red one, like over there. You're like, wicked. And I think you want to think about it in isolation, but also as a group, because sometimes as a brewery, you're not going to be fortunate enough to have, 3 or 4 of your beers on a bar or on a tap at any one time. It might just be the one. And it still needs to hold, its strength against everything else. But then as soon as they bring 2 in, or you do a tap takeover, that's almost the grand reveal where everyone goes, oh, this is aligned. Like they've got their shit together, right? This is they've nailed it. And I think there's a comfort that comes from consistency as well, versus looking at someone's clip range and going, hang on, is that the same brewery? Or, you know, they use that illustrator on that one, and now they've gone over to this 3D artwork to create something else. And it's a bit, I say, confusing as a consumer, isn't it, when you kind of look at one brand and they've done too many different things. So like, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to show me?
Fully. And you know what? Beer is a weird and wonderful world. And I'd say it's a unique one in that there isn't typically a hard and fast rule around that. Some breweries have found success in really mixing and matching their sort of artistic output. But I think when it comes to core range, recognizability and uniformity is so important. Ensuring that those star beers or your most consistent sellers are singing from the same hymn sheet, and they're telling a story as a whole, but then they're each telling their own story too, that the consumer can dig into, that adds value. Things like ensuring your pump clips follow a similar template, that your logo positioning is the same across those ones at least. Bringing that bit of familiarity in is important, which I've accidentally done a lovely segue into the story of White Rat. So
let's continue on the segue. Let's continue this journey into White Rat territory and the rest of the Rat family.
So with Ossett's beautiful pump clips, we decided to keep a fair bit of similarity in terms of what had gone before around exactly that, the template, logo positioning, and included in that is a lovely black sort of wave band across the bottom of the pump clips, which is very recognisably Ossett, and actually provides a very nice clear canvas for beer name, ABV, etc. And so when looking at evolving the branding of White Rat, which is Ossett's famous, fabulous, super spiky maverick of a hoppy 4% ale, we really dug into how to balance setting it out as its own brilliant beast whilst also ensuring that it's true to where it came from and it still looks part of Ossett's world in terms of a cask offering. So White Rat in itself has been Ossett's best-selling beer for a long time, and it was an absolute joy to work on. It's this challenge, I guess, that we looked at was the extent to which you stick to tradition with maybe your best seller and the beer that people maybe know you best for, what you're most recognised for, whilst not limiting yourself and enabling you to tap into newer markets, or perhaps even just revitalising assets that you feel could do with a little bit of love after they've been on the market for a while. So part of Ossett's sort of ambition, whilst sort of growing UK wide, was also to look at tapping into a potential sort of craft space somewhat. And so there was a really beautiful challenge and balance that I'm delighted with the outcome from around what to do with White Rat, this hero beer. And so there was an interesting piece around ensuring that the cask format, and so that pump clip, that still shows up and is recognizable using the same color palette as before, ensuring that the key icons of a White Rat, your logos there, making sure there's that consistency and recognizability whilst creating a key artwork that could be adapted to cans, say. The beer itself is sort of spearheading a fab new range under Ossett, which is their Rat range, which is the first time the brewery's done sort of a dedicated sort of specialised premium keg and cask range of beers, and they look phenomenal together. It makes sense. I'm delighted with the storytelling in that, you know, a beer that sparked something special and has always done something quite differently in the liquid itself, being way ahead of the curve when it came out in terms of style and punch, is leading a bit of a curve for the brewery's portfolio.
Massively. And I think what you've done with the Rat range is, to me, it looks heavily like craft inspired, because the artwork is very kind of urban. It's a little bit grungy. So how much of your thinking were you pulling from other projects that you worked on in the craft space and kind of going, we need to introduce this into Cask, this is what it requires?
So I'd say something fabulous about working with Ossett for me was the care and the respect for what's gone before, I guess, in terms of the overall master brand, but also these sub brands and White Rat itself. So there was a great deal of care and input from the leadership team around, making sure that existing customers, lovers of the brand, lovers of that beer, aren't isolated and absolutely feel like they're taken on a journey. And the phrase sort of evolution, not revolution, came around often. I think it's a really, really important piece to measure against at all times. And so it was fun playing around with, I guess, the creative side, playing with an illustrator directly, pulling themes that you think are really valuable in the existing artwork, and then looking, okay, how can we update this to really play into that newer market and give us the ingredients that a brand needs to play with and sort of run away with.
I love that. And if we took stock, like, just there's so many things that people who could, take this into account themselves. So the idea of lowering the barrier to entry, like really educating someone at the bar with a couple of simple words, educating the person behind the bar as well, paying homage and respect to where you've been before, so you don't isolate any of your existing audience, but also looking ahead and going, where is this going from a visual side of things? What do we need to do to respect what we've done, but actually move with the times and the flow? And that as a framework, I think, is a phenomenal thing that a lot of brewery owners can take away and consider. Maybe not necessarily do it on their own, but do it with the help of people, and you're going to be onto a great evolution. Like you say, evolution, not revolution. I love it. When we spoke in the past, you talked about the struggle of beers being brewed before briefed. Like, what, in terms of, why is that a pitfall? What's the problem there, Harry? Why should things be briefed before brewed, not the other way around?
Things should be briefed before brewed. Yeah, it's a funny phrase that I'd said really offhand once, but it's stuck with me now because, and you know what, this isn't a blame game. Every brewery ever would have been in a situation at least once, if not more than once, where you end up sort of fast tracking a new product, fast tracking a new beer, whether that's because there's a brew slot that's come available and a tank needs filling, or whether it's because a customer's come through with an amazing proposition that you'd be wild not to try and meet. But the crux, I think, is that you need to build beer around brand and not brand around beer, if that makes sense. So as soon as a beer's in tank, for example, whatever the reason that is in your situation, everything's trying to catch up with it, and it can become a really difficult, really time intensive project suddenly for what is often quite small teams of people. So, if your marketing are then trying to stamp on a name that feels right at a bit of speed, and then your usually external designer is trying to sort of get their head around what you're actually after in terms of the artwork for a beer. Your sales team are hoping for sort of tasting notes and everything to help fuel them to get out into market in time. If all of these are a matter of catch up, it breeds inconsistency, I'd say, and it can be incredibly difficult to backpedal and ensure that your brand is singing in its own right, rather than being led. I guess it's a classic cart before the horse scenario, isn't it, really? Where you end up all rushing and it can be incredibly difficult. Whereas if you take actually a short amount of time that can feel impossible to find within busy calendars and stretched diaries, but a short amount of time to think about, what are we brewing, why, who's it for, how do we get it to where it needs to be, it can do a hell of a lot of heavy lifting. I think the word brief can be quite scary. And you can imagine, an agency flying in and expecting a 10-page document, 3 workshops to get you to a point of ready to go. But in the reality of beer, smaller independent breweries at least, NPD is flying. You can put out 3 beers a week and it's not wild. But a brief of some form is invaluable, whether that's, I don't know, it doesn't even have to be a document, if I'm being completely honest. As a potentially helpful tidbit, it can be bullet points, but making sure that your team are aligned means that everyone's moving forward with purpose and excitement about your new products that are coming out. Baking rationale into all that you do, I'd say, is an amazing habit to try and start forming, even though it can be quite a difficult one.
So if, like you say, you're no stranger to how manic breweries can be and everyone's clutching to find 5 minutes left, right, and center, what would you title those bullet points? What are like the core 5 that if you went like, okay, we're gonna start a new beer, these are the bullets that we need, and then that's going to keep everyone on track moving forward?
What is the beer?
Great start.
What's the concept? Having clarity on that, that's a funny one as well. I won't get too carried away with this, but there's no right or wrong. I think in terms of if concepts for beer tend to come from production, if they come from sales marketing, I don't think there's a right answer of what that is, and it varies wherever you are. But ensuring there's alignment, at least across departments, on what the beer is, having clarity on why you're brewing it, which sounds ridiculous. And an easy answer could be something like, well, there was a brew slot, but the why needs to go a tiny bit deeper around, because perhaps because we did a beer that was similar, that did really well at this same time last year, utilizing your sales team, measuring what's worked before. And insights can be a huge thing, but actually there are much softer insights that you can get for little to no budget, utilizing your network and internal team, that can really help rationale on the why, I think, and ensuring that you're all on board for that. It also maybe sounds a bit silly and simple, but where could that beer be going? What is your route to market? Especially if you perhaps split between packaged, cans, bottles, and then also cask, keg. What's your key route to market, and who do you think your key buyer is going to be for this? Making sure there is a plan around that, whatever it is. If you're going D2C heavy, what's your digital strategy? Has that worked well before in your web shop? If you're going straight to trade customers, pubs, bars, have you got someone in mind? How much advance notice might they typically need for this style of beer at this time of year? Yeah, I'd say the why, the what, and where are vital. And I mean, there's a hell of a lot more, but that's your key ingredients, I'd say.
That's the foundational blocks of like getting it right. And now I suppose if you think back to what you're saying about having, artwork which is standardized, logo in the same place, the area where the text goes. If you get that kind of cycle nailed, you're always doing these 3 bullet points, you're just filling in the gaps in the artwork. It actually takes a lot of the stress away from that side of, kind of the marketing and the branding, because it's like, oh yeah, rinse, wash, and repeat a lot of the times. We know this, we've got the approach. If we're going to roll it out from a digital side of things, this has worked well in the past. Let's do this same thing again with a couple of tweaks, because this is what this is about. And from my side of things, from the branding aspect, I would always then push it through what is the brand filter. So you kind of you've got your 3 bullet points, but how does that then arc back to what the core of the brewery is at the end of the day? Because you want it to echo and represent the purpose of the brewery, and of course the tone of voice, make sure it's all aligned. You tick those boxes and you can't go far wrong. You can release what you want at that point, but at least you've got a reason for it, I suppose, right?
Yeah, how does it show up? And at each step of the way, does this align with our brand values and brand approach? Everything comes down to brand, but I would say that because that is my thing.
What we do. So I think a big struggle is the concept of that you mentioned, who are we brewing it for? Like, who is the drinker? And a lot of smaller independent breweries normally focus on the brewer wants to brew this because they like it. What is that kind of conversation? What are those things that brewer really needs to bear in mind to get out of their own head, I suppose, and start to relate to a wider market and a wider audience?
I think it's a really difficult one, actually, because realistically, I mean, I think most people in beer would say they do it because they love it. And it is to do with passion, and it is all about creativity. It's an amazing combination of art, science, create, you know. So it's important, I think, always to harness and cherish creativity and ambition and drive that's coming from production in terms of ideas for new beers and wanting to get them out. But yeah, to put it plainly, yeah, at the end of the day, if it's unlikely to sell, you need to think really seriously about, you know, how much time, ingredients, and production capacity you're going to put on something. There are examples, I think, where you can do something a bit more kooky and you know it's going to be a bit more unusual, but you have a certain customer that's guaranteed to like that, or a certain set of customers that you know actually opt in for something that's a little bit different. Or maybe it's the time of year that's appropriate for it, or Halloween's come round and maybe pumpkins are perfect, who knows? But I think in terms of actual consumers, it sounds really simple, but I think simple's effective here. What has worked for you in the past? What hasn't worked? And kind of rinse and repeat. I know that sounds like the most obvious advice ever, and I don't think I'm coming up with some absolute gold here, but it can be the easiest thing to forget when you're in such an exciting, fast-paced world, to take a minute to take stock and think about what has served you well in terms of that P&L, actually, at the end of the day. And within that, there can be real strength, becoming a specialist around a certain ABV, a specialist around, you know, certain hop varieties, how juicy, how thick, how hazy your beers are, or if they're super traditional. Like, you can find real strength in a bit of consistency. But yeah, again, it comes down to the why, doesn't it, Tim? And really, I guess, squeezing every penny in terms of insight that you can gain from your customers and your consumers. Things that seem really obvious, maybe like asking the right questions, whether that's your sales team going out in trade to who they already know and have relationships with, asking what they want more of, whether it's something like utilizing your mailing list. Most breweries have a half decent mailing list. It doesn't have to be loads, but setting out a survey that does iron out what would you like more of, what do you drink typically, and say that covers your basis in terms of essentials to an extent, in terms of taking a bit less risk with what you're putting out there. But then I think you can learn a lot if you are looking to take not a risk, but, you know, explore a bit further and maybe expand your horizons in what you're putting out with products by seeing what others are doing. Again, that seems really simple, but what brewery or brand is somewhat comparable to you? Whether that's in region or their positioning, the type of products they put out. What can I take from what they've done well and potentially give that a go? I think it's small steps in terms of risk. That sounds like the most boring approach ever, but
You say it sounds boring, but it's the safest way to do it. And I know that brewers will get itchy feet. It's like, yeah, but I've done that before. I want to do something different. Well, I've spoken to other guests about it, and it's very much that mental shift between like hobby brewer and business owner. Like, if you're a hobby brewer, crack on, brew what you want for you and your mates, and that's cool. Like, if you're not that worried about making a profit on it, then you're laughing. But if you're actively running a business, you got to brew the stuff that you know is going to work. And like you say, you got to look back at what's worked well and do it again, or evolve that and then push it because it's like version 2 this time. It's even better. or look at, as you say, what the market's doing. And also, I'd say take comfort in knowing that when you've developed a core range that sells really well, you've almost then given yourself the opportunity to go back in and be a little bit more explorative with your seasonals and your sub range. Like you look at Northern Monk, for example, they're smashing out a load of varying ones every other month right now, but the core range remains the same. They've kind of paid their dues. They've got a line that everyone loves and respects, and then they can release the wackies every now and again. And it's great. The alternative, I suppose, is someone like Vault City, where you have a reputation for doing something absolutely nuts, like clockwork every month. But even they've still got a few which are the hardcores they know they always sell. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Get inspired by what has happened and what worked in the past, and know that if you pay homage to that and if you lock that in, you get some real crowd pleasers, you can then level up. Like you say, it's not going to be boring forever, but you've got to get a really solid foundation that I suppose keeps the pennies coming in at the end of the day, because you've got to keep the lights on, you've got to keep the doors open.
100%. And I think with a Cask focus on, I guess, linking back to a generational shift, there are quite exciting, big, like genuinely significant themes in terms of interest and purchasing drivers that you can and should be aware of, even if it's not impacting what you're actually brewing, but how you're positioning it and how you're telling the story of that product. It can be incredibly powerful. So Gen Z, what are they into? What do all that lot like? Gen Z and general consumers across, a huge variety of ages now. People are interested in provenance stories. People are interested in where their food and drink comes from. People are interested in quality. They're interested in premiumization and freshness. So, if the amount of drinking occasions is reducing down, which it tends to be for younger drinkers at least, that occasion that they do go for or are interested in is special. And so I think cask brands can really thrive if they really start to dig into the likes of their provenance story. What is that heritage that's worth shouting about? What is maybe holding them back and not worth digging into too much? But what's special about your ingredients? If you're going to say it's a premium product, why? I think is a key piece. There are some obviously fantastic cask brands that do that especially well, and it's communicated perfectly from your web shop through to socials, through to sales teams, and then through to folk working on bars and serving it. If it's your water comes from an amazing spring, if it's heritage hops, whatever it is, talk about it. And I'd say that is something I've noticed more. Crafty breweries like Dara as a great example, when they're releasing a cask version or a new cask product, they're giving quite a bit of detail about hops used, why they're interesting, a little bit more about the brew itself, which I think is really fascinating for consumers that are just venturing into that. And I think most cask brewers could make the most of this sort of storytelling piece and the experiential piece, adding value to what you're offering by not only how it looks, but how you're showcasing it and making sure people understand what's gone into it, that heart and soul.
And this comes back to that brief thing that we were talking about, right? If you had that from day dot, it's not just there to benefit the people in the brew house, in the brewery, or the sales team or the marketing team. It's there to help the end drinker. Granted, you might tweak or expand on the language a little bit, but you've done the heavy lifting by this point. It's like, right, now let's bring our drinkers along for the journey. Let's kind of entertain them. Let's educate them. One thing you touched on there, which is really interesting, was deciding, like, if you are a premium cask brewery, why are you premium? How are you premium? I suppose that's a bigger question of kind of going beyond being a cask brewery. What kind of cask brewery are you? Are you trying to, like you say, be the top end? Are you trying to be a little bit more alternative, a little bit more rebellious? Are you trying to, practice and preach heritage, and there's that old school vibe to it. And I can't imagine there must be many breweries out there have taken that leap beyond going, we're a cask brewery. That's enough for us. So it's like, yeah, but what kind? Because that's then going to amplify your story even more and influence, I suppose, the designer that you choose and the layouts and your language, just by asking that one simple question. I've never thought about it that way, but it's like, yeah, it's not just cask, it's the next bit of cask. What are you? Sorry,
Yeah.
that was a revelation moment. I apologize. That was live.
No, it's good because we typically associate it almost exclusively with region, I'd say, in terms of like your layman, everyday consumer. It can be that, oh, that's what your specialism is, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, and it's. I was talking to an American brewery just the other day. It's a cask beer, cask brewery out in the States, and they're like the only one in the New York State. And we kind of forget sometimes how very special and how lucky we are that we are surrounded by the stuff here in the UK, which again does make it the challenge because you've got to stand out and you've got to communicate how valuable that is. But to actually be the one to wave the flag, the heritage side of things. And of course, you've got the movement going on right now, of course, to preserve and protect cask and to give it, was it heritage status? I can't remember the specific language.
Intangible cultural heritage status with UNESCO.
See, well done. You're far more intelligent than I am. All right. So let's bring this to a wrap then. The question I normally ask people at the end of these chats is, you're in a bar, you find yourself sat next to a brewer. In this case, he's a cask brewer. And he's gone, Harry, I need to do something. I've got to modernize. Like, oh, by the way, my cab's only a minute around the corner. I can see it on the app. Uber's just around the corner. What is that minute's worth of tidbit advice that you're leaving him with to go and do and go and sort out to help taking steps to create this rejuvenated cask brewery of his?
Okay, I'd say mine's applicable to, I guess, any kind of beer brand, really. And it's around demystifying brand and marketing. If you potentially don't have a marketer, you don't have a specialist within your brewery. I think the easiest way to view brand is picturing it as a person. So if your beer brand came and sat down at the pub, joining that pint that us two are drinking, who are they? What are they into? What do they look like? What's their vibe? What music do they listen to? What are their interests and what are their values? I think there can be some really fun, simple workshopping that has unbelievably brilliant results that can be done by anyone within a brewery. So sitting down, thinking, positioning your brewery as a person, I think, is the easiest way to digest it if you're not used to marketing spiel. But, what are we all about? What have we been about in the past? What do we want to be about in the future? What are we into? Be playful with it. What tunes are always on in your tap room? Is it metal? Is it, be authentic? What is your brewery? And then you start to form a brand. And then that brand, the foundations of values, interests, look, feel, that can then guide everything you do. And every time you're thinking about MPD, every time you're thinking about next steps, you hark back to your brand and think, does it align? Does it make sense? I'd say that's
No, it works. There's things like not everyone agrees with it, but there's the Hungarian archetype wheel, the brand personalities, which people could look at, but not everyone, are you the hero or the jester and all those different personalities. But other things I've said to breweries before is like, think about celebrities. Like, is there one who has that personality, that kind of vibe that you could see reflected in your brewery versus you having to conjure something up out of thin air? Like, there's probably an existing person who's somewhat aligned with what you want your brewery to be, or you already know it to be instead. Harry, this has been epic, mate. Where can people find you, talk to you, send messages, get in touch, pick your brains and all that good stuff?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest hearty home, where I'm sure a good few folk listening or watching are on now. So yeah, it's Harry Kelly on LinkedIn. Yeah, it'd be great to chew the fat, get a pint, nerd out, and maybe discuss any projects you'd like some support on going forward.
Love it, mate. Yeah, everyone connect with Harry on LinkedIn. She's a ledge and you will not regret it at all. everyone who has given their time, their eyeballs, their earballs, not their mouthballs. This is not a taste show, but who's listened, watched, and enjoyed this. I really, really appreciate you giving us 45 minutes of your time. We know you're busy. For those of you tuning in later, yes, this is Tim from the past talking to you in the future. It's trippy, it's Terminator level shiz. But again, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this show, of course, go like, follow, and subscribe, and all that really cheesy cliche stuff that I have to say. Branding for Breweries, your rock. And I'll see you on the other side, people. Rock on.